Just applying for the job of chief executive amongst, say, your colleagues and fellow professionals, did they use the words poison chalice or mad?
Not exactly those phrases, but the thought was, why Thurrock? What's interesting about it? And when I described the challenge, which I think is a very large challenge, I guess they could see the attractiveness. But for many people, this wasn't the right job. For me, it felt like a really good opportunity to use the skills that I'd learned in a complex environment.
And so you mentioned the word challenge. What to you are the major challenges?
Well, I think there's sort of really threefold challenges. One is about the management of the council, and that's really about delivering high quality services to the community. The second challenge is about working with the community to try and generate higher aspirations and to set higher targets for some of our services and other public services. And the third is the massive regeneration challenge. You look at the scale of the opportunity that we have. The regeneration programs that should be delivered in Thurrock will change people's lives, and we've got to make sure they're changing for the better and giving them more opportunity. So I think it's really three different stages: internal, the community, and then the regeneration opportunity.
Because you mentioned regeneration, with the Development Corporation being absorbed into the council, somebody said that the epitaph for the DC was that they were going to try and make Thurrock be like the London Docklands, and the people of Thurrock aren't just going to wear it.
Right, we've got to make sure that we don't get that cliff edge development that comes with Docklands. When you go into Docklands, there's a real contrast between the have-nots that are outside and the haves and the high quality within. What we've got to do is make sure this regeneration really benefits the community. That's the ambition. And frankly, in 20 years' time, if we look back and say, yeah, we created 20,000 jobs, but none of them went to local people, we will have failed. And I'm quite clear about that. We've got to do this working with the community for the benefit of the community.
And 18,500 houses to live up.
Absolutely. And that should give new housing opportunities for local people. One of my challenges to the community and to the council is, what's the aspirational pathway for a local resident? Do they, when they become wealthy and have greater aspirations, actually aspire to move out? Most people wouldn't, I believe, if the housing choice was wider. So we need to look at that whole range of choice, right from bottom end social housing, 1-2 bedroom flats, right the way through to larger family houses, whether there's a social housing or private occupation. So we've got to make sure we've got that complete mix within the borough.
You've been in power, so to speak, for say 6 weeks now, and you've been, one of the things you've done is walk the wards. Compare and contrast, and what's your impressions?
That's been a really interesting piece of work, actually, because I'm getting a much closer feel for what the real issues are, and as I said, really, those issues cover the whole spectrum from when I look at the wards, mostly our street cleansing is fairly good. Actually, it's pretty high standard. 1 or 2 areas where it isn't. I think there are services that we need to improve, and grounds maintenance is one that's on my agenda, particularly on the housing estates. Highways maintenance, where actually we need to make sure we've got the right investment programme, right the way through to going down to see what's happening at London Gateway and being absolutely inspired by the scale of that. Because I've seen the brochure, I've read the brochure, seen the fly through. You actually go on site and it is inspiring, the scale of it. So as part of the ward visits, actually I'm doing the whole spectrum. Very often for local ward councillors, the things that come into their surgeries, the things that local residents complain about, are relatively easily fixed. The frustration is, why haven't we fixed them? But also we've got to make sure that ward councillors are engaged in looking at the implications of this massive regeneration programme for their constituents and for Thurrock as a whole.
You've worked, vast experience in the public sector, vast experience in the private sector. Do you think Thurrock has a problem with its brand, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd express it as brand. I think there is this issue about aspiration and its self-image as well. And I think we've got to be a bit more confident. And actually confidence comes from getting some external recognition about how good some services are, and that can give you the confidence to challenge the worst performing services, whether they're council-run services or those run by our partners. So, for example, working with the primary care trust, looking at the fact that people die earlier in Thurrock than in some other areas. It's a very serious issue for us, and I think we've got to have the confidence internally that will allow us to get our partners to deliver for our community in a way that I haven't detected here yet. I think we're not punching above our weight, we're probably not punching at our weight in terms of influencing our partners as well, and that's clearly got to be on the agenda.
And what about your personal style? Somebody who should remain nameless said that they watched you operate, I think you have something called Star Chamber.
Yes.
And they felt there was an element of sort of Jean-Luc Picard's Make It So.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I suppose what I want to do is to create a culture where people are confident, they know what the direction is, and they deliver that to the best of their ability. Part of my early perception is that a lot of our managers are managing a level below where they should be. So if our top management isn't creating the leadership and the vision, they're in there on the day-to-day stuff, then maybe we haven't got enough people giving that leadership and direction. That's not to say that the senior managers should be divorced from delivering the services, and that's why I'm walking the walk, going around the wards, because our job is to create the link between the overall vision, how we're driving the community and the regeneration agenda, etc., and the link right the way through to what that means in terms of day-to-day services. And I think on some of our services we've got that very well in place. So adult social care, for example, a very good example of where those services are very good on the ground, and we know what our strategy is, and we know how we're working with partners. Some of our other services aren't that integrated.
Can you improve the performance of the 49 councillors, or is that not your job?
My job is to make sure the environment is there in which they do perform, and I know there's been some comments about the council meeting. Part of my challenge to the officers is what agenda are we creating for our members? So are we creating an environment in which they're thinking about leadership of the borough, leadership of the communities, or are we creating an environment where actually all we're doing is inspiring them to talk about individual detail? So I think that's part of the job of the officers, is to create the environment in which the members can deliver that leadership. And I do think that's the job for us. We've had lots of comments on the member-officer relations. We've got to get that right. Had lots of comments on our ability to deliver and to manage basic policies. We've got to get all that right. And then we've got to free the members from having to pick up individual complaints because the services are good enough.
There are a lot of, I understand, a lot of officers who have received, who know there could be bad news for them.
Yep.
And, from down in youth and connection services
Yep.
to all around the borough. It's very hard, it must be very hard to come to work every day with
Yep.
that hanging over you.
It is, and I think what we've got to remember is the human story behind the cuts, behind the funding constraints that we've got, and we've got to try and make sure that we're maximising the opportunities for those individuals. Now that might be about looking after them as an employer. So if we do get to a decision of cutting a service, what are the redeployment opportunities, what are the training opportunities, how do we use their skills in a different environment? In some areas it might be encouraging community activity, community leadership, maybe spin-off organisations. There might be some functions that we have which might be better placed in a charitable trust, for example. So creating the charitable trust and working with the officers and the community to take that forward. So I'm confident that there will be a range of options coming out of this. The problem for individuals is that takes time. And we all know the scale of the cuts that we're facing. I wouldn't sit here and say there will be no redundancies. I think there will be some redundancies, there will be impacts on people's lives. What we have to do is make sure we're maximising opportunity where we can.
Do you have a 1 or a 3 or a 5 year plan? Do you want to leave a legacy, so to speak?
I have all of those. The short-term plan is let's get the culture right, let's get the services right, let's make sure we're delivering for the people of Thurrock. There is clearly a short-term constraint within that, which is about managing the budget. This council has very, very small reserves. It is very tight. It doesn't have a great deal of fat in it, and therefore we have to be very, very careful to manage the budget, both in year and preparing the budget for next year. So the short-term priority, unfortunately, has to be around managing the finances. However, then the medium term is let's make sure we've got services right. Let's inspire people to understand how their services fit into the community. How do our services benefit the community, and what are the real implications for our local community of what we do? So understanding the history of Thurrock, why Thurrock is the shape that it is, why the community is the shape it is, and then how the regeneration agenda will change that. And then the long-term agenda, of course, is delivering all of the potential within the regen agenda. And that's probably a 5 to 10 year story, I think. That's a longer term.
But after 6 weeks, you're relishing the challenge.
It's a great challenge. It's a great place to be. It's everything that I thought it would be. Not as bad as people paint it from the outside. Some really good examples of services, and our library service, for example, is a very good one. Street cleansing, I've said, is good. So there are some very good services. And the external perception, unfortunately, is driven by 1 or 2 small stories that become of national interest. What we've got to do is start spreading some positive messages as well. So you talked about brand earlier on, image, let's get that culture right.